The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was filled with wealthy investors, elegant gowns, and champagne glasses clinking in the air. At the center of attention was a tall, confident millionaire named Charles Whitmore, known for his arrogance and cruel sense of humor. In a corner of the room, a young girl no older than 16 stood nervously. Her clothes were modest compared to the glittering outfits around her, but her eyes shone with quiet determination. Charles, smirking as always, noticed her standing near the buffet. "What are you doing here, little one?" he asked loudly, drawing the attention of the crowd. "This is no place for you." The girl took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and said proudly, "I speak 9 languages." Laughter erupted. Charles himself chuckled and shook his head, mocking her. 9 languages? Don't be ridiculous. You're just trying to impress us, aren't you? But the girl didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a look so calm, it made even Charles pause for a second. The laughter from the crowd echoed across the ballroom, but the girl stood her ground. She folded her hands neatly in front of her, her voice steady. "If you don't believe me," she said softly, "you may test me." Charles smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, really? Fine then. Let's make this interesting." He turned toward one of the guests, a French businessman, and said, "Why don't you humor us? Speak to her in your language." The man raised an eyebrow but leaned forward, speaking a complex sentence in fluent French. Without hesitation, the girl responded flawlessly, her accent crisp, her tone confident. The businessman's eyes widened, and he nodded in approval. The room went quiet for a moment, then murmurs began spreading. "Was that really perfect?" someone whispered. Charles's smirk faltered, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Beginner's luck," he scoffed. "Anyone can memorize a phrase." He gestured to another guest, a woman from Japan. "Your turn. Let's see if she can handle your language." The woman spoke quickly, choosing a phrase that even intermediate learners would struggle with. The girl's lips curved into a small smile as she replied fluently, her tone polite yet precise. Gasps filled the air. The woman covered her mouth in shock. Charles's face grew red. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. What had started as a joke was quickly turning into something else entirely. Guests leaned in closer, intrigued, some even recording the moment on their phones. Charles clenched his jaw. He could feel the attention slipping away from him, and he wasn't about to let a teenage girl humiliate him in front of his wealthy peers. "Fine," he snapped. 2 tricks don't prove anything. 9 languages, you said? Let's push this further." He spotted a diplomat from Russia at the far end of the table. "Why don't you say something? Let's see how far this little act goes." The diplomat hesitated, then spoke in rapid Russian, using a formal tone filled with difficult words. Without missing a beat, the girl responded in the same language, her words smooth and confident. Gasps filled the room once again. The diplomat actually smiled and gave her a respectful nod. Now the whispers turned into open conversation among the crowd. "She's remarkable. How can a girl her age know so much? Is she some kind of prodigy?" Charles shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Anyone can practice a few sentences. She probably rehearsed this entire act." But deep inside, he knew, this was no act. The girl raised her chin slightly, her calm presence silencing the whispers. "Would you like me to continue?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Charles scoffed. "Continue? You'll run out of words soon enough." His voice carried, but his confidence was beginning to crack. At that moment, a guest from Spain stepped forward with curiosity. He spoke rapidly in Spanish, deliberately using idioms and cultural references that would confuse even many native speakers. The girl's eyes sparkled as she replied with flawless fluency, weaving in her own clever expressions. The Spaniard's jaw dropped, and he broke into applause. Incredible, he exclaimed. She speaks like she was raised in Madrid. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others filming in excitement. Charles's forced grin looked more like a grimace now. He muttered under his breath, "This can't be happening," not giving him a chance to recover. Another guest, a German entrepreneur, joined in. "Let's test her, then." He spoke a complex phrase, heavy with technical vocabulary. Again, without hesitation, the girl replied in perfect German. The entrepreneur stepped back, stunned. "Wunderbar," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." The room buzzed with energy now. All eyes were on her. All respect was shifting her way. Charles, for the first time in years, felt small. By now, the ballroom was no longer filled with laughter, it was filled with awe. Guests leaned closer, whispering about the girl as if she were some rare treasure uncovered in plain sight. Phones were raised higher, capturing every second. Charles tried to regain control of the situation. He slammed his glass onto the table and barked, "Enough. This isn't a talent show. This is a gathering for serious people." But his words only made him look desperate. The girl turned her gaze toward him, her eyes calm but unwavering. "You challenged me," she said softly, "and I have only just begun." With that, she shifted into flawless Italian, addressing a couple seated near the front. Their eyes widened in delight as she spoke naturally, even making a small joke that sent them laughing warmly. Without waiting, she moved smoothly into Arabic, greeting a distinguished man in the crowd with respect and poise. The man placed his hand over his chest in admiration, his expression filled with astonishment. The crowd began to cheer, clapping loudly, unable to contain their amazement. Charles stood frozen. His smirk was gone. His laughter silenced. For the first time in his life, he was the one being mocked, not with words, but by undeniable brilliance. And the girl wasn't finished yet. The girl took a slow breath, her confidence radiating brighter with every word. She looked around the room, as if daring anyone to doubt her now. In smooth Mandarin, she addressed a Chinese businesswoman near the stage. The woman blinked in surprise, then broke into a wide smile. "Perfect pronunciation," she said, clapping. Gasps rippled through the audience again. Phones captured every moment, live streams already spreading the story across social media. Charles's face turned pale. He tugged at his collar, sweat shining on his forehead. Still, he tried one last defense. "It's a trick," he stammered. "She must be reading from something, no one her age could possibly know this much." But the girl wasn't reading. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't even nervous. Her final words came in flawless Portuguese, spoken with warmth and elegance. A Brazilian guest nearly dropped his glass in shock, then applauded enthusiastically. Now the room thundered with claps, cheers, and admiration. The young girl stood proudly, her voice carrying over the noise. "You laughed at me. But knowledge cannot be mocked. It only shines brighter when doubted." The entire crowd rose to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. And Charles Whitmore, the arrogant millionaire, was left standing there, humiliated, speechless, and utterly defeated. As the ovation roared around the ballroom, the girl stood calmly, her hands folded in front of her. The once dismissive crowd now looked at her with respect and admiration. Even the servers paused in awe, watching history unfold in front of their eyes. Charles tried to slip into the background, but too many phones were pointed at him now, capturing his stunned silence. His arrogance had backfired, and the whole world would see it. Then, from the back of the room, an older gentleman stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and slowly, the cheers softened into silence. He walked straight toward the girl, a warm smile on his face. "You've grown so much," he said tenderly. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce my daughter, Elena, recipient of one of the world's youngest honorary degrees in linguistics, invited here as a special guest." Gasps swept the crowd. A few people clutched their pearls in disbelief. Elena, the girl who had been mocked minutes ago, was not just a prodigy, she was internationally recognized for her gift. Charles's mouth fell open. Your daughter," he muttered, his voice cracking. The gentleman nodded firmly. "And she has more wisdom in her heart than most men in this room." The ballroom erupted once more, not with laughter, but with thunderous applause for Elena. She glanced at Charles one final time, her voice calm but cutting, "Respect is earned, not bought. Remember that." And with that, the millionaire who once mocked her was left in silence, while the young girl walked away celebrated as a true genius. The applause seemed endless. Guests crowded around Elena, shaking her hand, praising her talent, asking questions in different languages just to hear her reply. Every answer she gave only added to the amazement. Meanwhile, Charles slipped toward the exit, hoping to avoid the cameras. But it was too late, clips of him laughing at Elena had already gone viral. The world was seeing him mocked by his own arrogance, while the girl he tried to humiliate became the star of the night. By the end of the evening, Elena was sitting at the center table, not as a guest on the sidelines but as the guest of honor. Influential figures were eager to speak with her, journalists already planning stories about her extraordinary gift. The old gentleman, her father, leaned down and whispered proudly, "Tonight, you didn't just prove yourself, you reminded everyone that true wealth is knowledge." Elena smiled, glancing once more at the ballroom doors where Charles had disappeared. She had no need to gloat. His downfall was complete, and her rise was just beginning. The cameras flashed, the ovation continued, and the world now knew her name. A girl once mocked, now celebrated as a legend. The next morning, headlines exploded across news outlets and social media platforms. Teen linguist humiliates arrogant millionaire live on camera. Who is Elena? The girl who speaks 9 languages and stunned the world. Clips of the moment racked up millions of views overnight. People across the globe watched as Charles Whitmore laughed at her, and then fell silent in utter defeat. Charles tried to issue a statement, calling the incident a misunderstanding, but no one bought it. Memes flooded the internet, his smirk turned into a symbol of arrogance crushed by brilliance. His reputation took a blow he would never recover from. Meanwhile, Elena was invited to conferences, universities, and even television interviews. She spoke humbly, always reminding the world that her gift was not just languages, but the ability to connect people from different cultures. Her words inspired millions. You may laugh at what you don't understand. But knowledge, when shared, is the most powerful language of all. And from that day forward, no one saw her as just a girl ever again. She became a voice of wisdom the world couldn't ignore. Within weeks, Elena's life transformed completely. What started as a humiliating attempt by Charles to mock her had turned into a global phenomenon. Universities from Oxford to Harvard sent invitations, offering her full scholarships. Cultural organizations reached out, asking her to serve as a youth ambassador. Even leaders of nations praised her for her gift of unity through language. Her social media accounts, once almost empty, exploded with millions of followers. People weren't just fascinated by her fluency, they were inspired by her courage to stand tall against ridicule. She became a symbol of strength for young people everywhere who had ever been underestimated. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore's empire suffered. Investors began to distance themselves from him, seeing him as reckless and out of touch. His name became synonymous with arrogance, while Elena's name became tied to brilliance and humility. One night, during a live interview, the host asked Elena, "What do you feel when you think back to that night, standing in front of the man who mocked you?" She smiled softly and replied, "I don't think about the laughter. I think about the silence that followed, because silence is what happens when truth speaks louder than pride." The audience erupted in applause. Elena was no longer just a girl who spoke 9 languages. She was a young woman who had taught the world a universal lesson. Just when it seemed Elena's story had reached its peak, a new revelation emerged, one that stunned the world even more than her mastery of languages. During a televised interview with a major news network, the host held up a folder with a faint smile. "Elena," he said, "we've done a little research on your background. There's something our viewers should know." The crowd leaned in, curious. Elena remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The host continued, "You're not just a prodigy. You're also the youngest person ever recruited by an international cultural organization. For the last year, you've been secretly working as a junior consultant, helping diplomats communicate across borders." Gasps filled the studio. The audience clapped in disbelief. Elena nodded quietly. "It's true," she admitted. "But I never shared it before because I didn't want titles to speak louder than my actions." The host pressed further. "And is it true, that the very night Charles Whitmore mocked you, you were scheduled to give a private presentation to world leaders?" Elena smiled modestly. "Yes. But life gave me a different stage first." The crowd erupted in applause. Viewers worldwide flooded the broadcast with messages of admiration. And just like that, Elena's reputation soared even higher, not just a prodigy, not just a symbol of courage, but a hidden force already shaping the future of international unity. Charles Whitmore, watching from home, buried his face in his hands. The humiliation was complete. Months later, Elena stood before an assembly unlike any she had faced before. The Great Hall of the United Nations gleamed with flags from across the globe. Leaders, diplomats, and scholars filled the seats, all waiting to hear the young girl who had taken the world by storm. As she stepped to the podium, cameras flashed, and the room fell silent. Elena placed her hands on the lectern, her posture calm but commanding. She began in English, thanking the audience. Then, seamlessly, she shifted into French, then Spanish, then Arabic, her words carrying a message of unity. Every sentence flowed into the next, each language perfectly delivered. Representatives leaned forward, many with tears in their eyes. Her closing words rang out in 9 languages, echoing through the chamber. "Knowledge is the bridge between nations. Respect is the foundation of peace. And laughter at another's expense will never be stronger than the truth." The hall erupted into thunderous applause. Delegates stood, clapping and cheering, many moved to tears. In that moment, Elena was no longer just a girl who spoke 9 languages. She was a voice for humanity, a symbol of how brilliance and humility could silence arrogance and change the world. And as the applause thundered around her, somewhere far away, Charles Whitmore watched the broadcast alone, realizing that the girl he once mocked had become a legend whose name would be remembered for generations. The standing ovation in the United Nations Hall lasted several minutes. Leaders from opposite sides of long-standing conflicts exchanged glances, some even shaking hands for the first time in years. Elena's words had done what armies and negotiations often could not, she reminded everyone of their shared humanity. As she stepped down from the podium, reporters rushed forward, flashes of cameras lighting her path. But Elena remained humble, bowing her head slightly in respect to the audience. Her father, waiting at the edge of the stage, smiled proudly. "You've done more in one speech than many do in a lifetime," he whispered. Elena turned to him, her voice steady but soft. "It wasn't me, Father. It was the power of understanding. That is the greatest language of all." From that day forward, her name became a symbol of hope. Schools taught her story, children around the world were inspired to learn new languages, and leaders often quoted her when speaking of unity. As for Charles Whitmore, he never recovered from the humiliation. The world remembered him not as a powerful millionaire, but as the man who laughed, and was silenced by a girl's brilliance. Elena's legacy, however, only grew brighter. She was no longer just a prodigy. She was the voice of a generation. A girl once mocked, forever remembered as the one who spoke to the world in its own language and left it speechless.